Hey folks, I'd like to inform you that these webinars are being recorded for continual education purposes. So if you prefer to remain off camera, totally understand. The chat function, the conversations will not be visible, so feel free to connect with us there. Okay. Oh. The Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. I acknowledge that I'm located on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape people, and the Chaurand nations on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. This land continues to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors to our society. And I feel it's important to do an Indigenous land acknowledgement, not only because I myself identify as Métis non-status, but we need to give acknowledgements of the fact that we were not the first people, or settlers were not the first people on this land, and that it's the responsibility needs to be shared. It's treaty isn't just Indigenous, it's also non-Indigenous. Okay, so you think you have ADHD. Now what? Welcome to the webinar. First off, hello, my name is Robert, and I work with people to help them to become their best self. I am a psychotherapist and I provide counseling. And I also do webinars and try and share resources and information. And my intention today is to help you think differently about ADHD. So here's the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about how I became diagnosed, the 3 different types of ADHD, symptoms of ADHD, and that's what is included in the DSM-5, what is not included in the DSM-5, cultural and moral views of ADHD, which talks about kind of the internalization of moral judgment and the mental journey of receiving or seeking an ADHD diagnosis and the role of medication. So, my ADHD diagnosis. I've struggled most of my life, and I didn't know why. My brother was diagnosed with ADHD back in the 80s. You know, he had the typical kind of boy presentation. I hate those labels, but whatever. So he had the external presentation. So the hyperactivity, the behavioral issues, all of those things. I didn't. I was the quiet kid. I was the one that was the daydreamer. I fidgeted a lot. I, spoke a million miles an hour, but I didn't make a big fuss. I wasn't, nobody needed to, control me. Again, don't like the term, but so I was able to get by. I was able to get through. When my daughter was diagnosed, I thought to myself, you know what? We have a lot of similarities. Like the way that we think and the way that we act is very, very similar. And I was like, well, maybe I should get diagnosed. And so it took around 8 months. I talked to my GP. She put in a referral for a psychiatrist, for a specialist. It took a really long time, 8 months. And that took me kind of constantly kind of talking to my GP, being like, hey, what's going on with the referral? Until finally I had it, I did it. And at the end of the assessment, the psychologist looked at me and was like, I can tell you right now that you have ADHD. She's like, it's not a shock or surprise at all. So I was like, okay. She's like, I still will do the paperwork all and send it to you, but I know that you have it. I was like, interesting. This is not uncommon. A lot of people are starting to get diagnosed as adults, and a lot of times it's because of their kids or nieces or nephews, because they kind of just got through life and they thought, well, this is just who I am, this is how I am. And they didn't realize that there was a reason they were struggling so much, and that it wasn't just their own kind of issues or incompetence or whatever we tend to think about ourselves. So get into that a little bit after. So what are the 3 presentations of ADHD? So there's predominantly inattentive, there is predominantly hyperactive / impulsive, and then there's combined. So people with hyperactive ADHD feel the need for constant movement. They often, as I'm doing now, fidget, squirm, and struggle to stay seated. Children often appear to act as if driven by a motor and run around excessively, maybe sitting oddly in different ways and turning. People of all ages may talk nonstop, interrupt others, blurt out answers, struggle with self-control. This type of ADHD is more recognizable and more often diagnosed in children and in men. So inattentive is people tend to make careless mistakes because they have difficulty sustaining attention, following detailed instructions, and organizing tasks and activities. They have weak working memory, are easily distracted by external stimuli, and often lose things. Well, sorry about that. This type of ADHD is more commonly diagnosed in adults and girls and was formerly known as ADD. And then there's combined type, which is what I have. And that's both of them together. And people with combined type of ADHD demonstrate 6 or more symptoms of inattention and 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity. So for the losing stuff, I lost my car keys once for like a year and didn't find them, or actually I think it was closer to 2 years, until we moved for a vehicle that we no longer owned. And then I literally just found my truck key that I've lost for 6 months that was still in the truck. Yeah. So this isn't like, oh, I kind of forget. It's like, no, it's you know, when I lose things, I lose things, right? Okay. So next is symptoms of ADHD included in the DSM. So you can either kind of shout out or put in the chat, what do you think is included, symptoms of ADHD that are included in the DSM-5? Thoughts?
Is it more the hyperactivity ones?
It can be. Like what?
Like fidgeting, not being able to sit still, not controlling their behavior so much, or their movements.
Movement, yeah. Yeah. So 6 or more symptoms of inattention for children up to age 16 years, or 5 or more for adolescents age 17 and older, and adults. So symptoms of inattention have been present for at least 6 months, and they are inappropriate for the developmental level. So what that means is often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork, at work, or with other activities, often has trouble holding attention on tasks or play activities, often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly, does not follow through on instructions, and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. Example, loses focus, sidetracked, often has trouble organizing tasks and activities, often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to do tasks that require mental effort over a long period of time, such as schoolwork or homework. And again, this is often very interest-based, which is why people with ADHD can focus in on video games for like 6 hours, but then well, doing the dishes. And it's like, well, why can you do one and not the other? It's because one provides dopamine and the other one doesn't. And so that's where, you know, the whole idea of like, it's a moral thing. It's a choice. It's like, well, if you can do this, then you should be able to do this. And that's very kind of neurotypical way of thinking. Often loses things necessary for tasks and activities, car keys, pencils, books, tools, wallets, keys, paperwork, eyeglasses, mobile phones, is often easily distracted and is often forgetful in daily activities. I cannot tell you how many times I've asked my daughter to go upstairs, brush her teeth, go to the bathroom to get ready for school or to get ready for bed. And I give her half an hour and I go up and I'm like, hey, did you do this? And she's like, no. What are you doing? Oh, I got distracted. I forgot. Right. So another one is hyperactivity and impulsivity. So 6 or more symptoms of hyperactivity and impulsivity for children up to age 16 years, or 5 or more for adolescents age 17 years and older, and adults. So again, present for at least 6 months to an extent that is disruptive and inappropriate for the person's developmental level. Now, here's the thing. Executive dysfunction can be caused by many different things, not just ADHD. And so one of the things of like figuring out, you know, is this something that is ADHD, is are these struggles you've had your entire life? Not is this something that's recent that's come up because of stressors and, you know, kind of like environmental issues, but is this something that in some form or another has been an issue for you basically since you were a child? Which is why they often want to talk to your parents or people that have known you when you're younger to look at report cards. to get an idea if these are kind of ongoing concerns. Not always helpful, because sometimes they don't present because of masking, but it can be helpful. So often fidgets with or taps hands or feet or squirms in the seat. Constant moving. Often leaves seats in situations when remaining seated is expected. Often runs about or climbs in situations where it's not appropriate. So adolescents or adults may be limited to like just feeling restless. Often unable to play or take part in leisure activities gently or quietly. We got a new cat. It's our daughter's cat. She absolutely loves it. She's been wanting a cat since she was like 4. She constantly kind of goes towards her really quickly, and I keep telling her, like, you need to slow, gentle, and she understands that, but she has a hard time executing it, right? So that's an example. It's often on the go, often talks excessively or very fastly, often blurts out an answer before a question has been completed, often has trouble waiting their turn, often interrupts or intrudes on others. And again, people view this as like, you're like, oh, you're being rude, like this is a conscious thing, and it's like, no, actually it's not. There's many different reasons why people with ADHD interrupt. So to diagnose in adults, only 5 symptoms are needed. So these are some examples of things that are in the DSM. Right, there we go. Okay. So symptoms of ADHD not included in the DSM-5. So what are some that you think are not included?
Would there be anything about time blindness?
Yeah. Yeah. So some are inconsistent performance. So does poorly on task, perceived as uninteresting due to rushing through and missing key details. When interested, engaged, performs extremely well with great attention to detail. Difficulty with transitions. I can't count the number of times I've asked my daughter, when you're on your way down to the basement, can you take the stuff on the counter to bring it down? And then I'll add something else, and then she just melts down because it's too much at once. Or she's doing something, actually do something else, but I don't warn her, I don't give her that transition time. I can do the same thing. Again, I'm older, so I have the emotional capacity. So I don't like melt down, at least externally, but it definitely does, kind of go there. Which kind of goes to difficulty stopping one task to move on to another one. Hyper focus to the point of forgetting to do things like eat, drink, use the bathroom for long periods of time. So cognitive rigidity, which is an example of like black and white thinking. So seeing things in polar extremes, such as either all good or all bad. Now, these are things that many people struggle with, but it's not uncommon. Difficulty multitasking, yes. Well, yes and no. Again, it's weird because sometimes multitasking can actually be helpful for us. Like for myself, if I'm like in a webinar like this, if I just had to sit and listen, I wasn't able to engage, I would probably be on my phone playing a mobile game. That would enable me to be able to pay attention to what's happening while my hands are engaged, so I don't zone out. So sometimes it can be difficulty to multitask. Sometimes multitasking is actually what enables us to pay attention. Poor interoception and preparation. Basically what that means is that you don't have great awareness of where things are in relation to yourself. So tending to be very clumsy, bumping into things, tripping, going up the stairs, poor fine motor control, kind of poor self-awareness, often doesn't recognize hunger or thirst or emotions until they're very extreme. Difficulty estimating how much force something will need. So like very heavy-handed. So, one can have really excellent gross motor skills, so like a strong athlete, but still have very poor fine motor skills. Like time blindness. So people with ADHD perceive time less accurately than neurotypical people. So the idea of how long it will take us to do a task is So it's like, oh, can you do this? Sure, that'll take me 5 minutes. Actually, more likely to take me like 10 to 15. So there's kind of the rule of three. Anytime that you think, oh, this is going to take me this amount of time, triple it, just to give yourself that room, right? So we tend to underestimate how much time a task will take, as well as how much time has passed. Oh, I've only been working on this for like 20 minutes. Oh, it's actually been an hour. Oh, right. Difficulties with emotional regulation. So experiencing intense emotions for longer than most of their developmental peers, or experiencing it really intensely, like really, really sharp, and then down, right? So either it lasts longer or it's just like a flash in the pan, but it's very intense. Difficulty inhibiting inappropriate behavior affiliated with those strong emotions. So when you do get super like ragey and you're just like screaming or yelling or throwing stuff, it's not a conscious decision. It's you literally kind of in that moment lost control. Again, not saying it's okay, not saying that it's acceptable, but it is, there's a reason for it. Difficulty redirecting attention away from the source of intense emotions. So kind of like, in other words, just having big feelings and big reactions. Sensory processing differences. So increased or decreased sensory processing abilities and sensory sensitivities, often both in the same person. So my daughter is huge about any sort of tags on her clothing. We have to take all of them off. Doesn't bother me. What does bother me is sound. I am hypersensitive to sound. And sometimes I can be in a loud environment and I'm fine. Other times I'm in a loud environment and I just shut down. Sometimes it's one specific noise, like when I'm making the dog's food, I have one dog that whines and it drives me insane, absolutely insane. So some people are hyposensitive and some people are hypersensitive, and some people are hypersensitive in some senses and yet, hyposensitive in some senses and yet hypersensitive in others. So increased sensory sensitivity can lead to sensory overwhelm or overload, which increases a person's irritability and anxiety and lowers their frustration tolerance, so their ability to handle the big emotions that they're feeling. Right? These are all things that are not in the DSM-5, but very much impact and are symptoms of ADHD. And just to kind of go back really quickly, if I can go back, yeah. Just kind of back up here. If you have ADHD, this doesn't mean that you're going to experience all of these. And then if you do experience these, it doesn't mean that you have ADHD. And that's what makes this so hard, right? Because symptoms are common with a number of overlapping disorders and neurotypes, but they also often does include ADHD. And these are things that everybody struggles with from time to time. So it's, people are like, oh, everybody's got ADHD. No, they don't, right? It's the severity, it's the dosage, right? So speaking of common myths about ADHD, what are some that you think? What have you heard? What do you think? What it's when somebody says like, oh, I have ADHD, what pops into your mind? Any thoughts?
Just the idea or the fact that they can never be still. They're always, always, always moving, which is not necessarily true.
Yep. Yeah. Fidgeting, struggle to sit still. Yeah, that's a huge one, right? Because again, as we've seen, it's not only hyperactivity, it's also inattentiveness. So you can be the person that sits perfectly still and is inside your own brain and daydreaming, and you can have super severe ADHD and not struggle with fidgeting at all. And there's other people, they fidget, but it's small. It's like, they're, tapping their foot, or, they're playing with stuff, or, but they're not bouncing in their chair. Right? Poor inability to pay attention, behavior issues. Yeah. Yeah.
And just the assumption that they won't be successful at things, like won't be successful at school, and just because you have ADHD, you could be brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's more old school to think that people with ADHD don't have the same intelligence. But I think some people will judge you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, definitely. People will definitely judge you for sure. So yeah, no, those are all great. Some other ones are, it's only diagnosed in kids. like you said, the only symptoms are hyperactivity, that it looks scattered on the outside, and also that the individual has struggled with it in their career or in their lives. And again, right, some people have developed coping skills which have enabled them to survive, to get through and to cope and to live. That ADHDers can't hold jobs or are not reliable, that they struggle with information recall, impulsive in relationships, can come off as lazy, inconsiderate, self-centered, that ADHD is not a real disorder, that's only a disorder of childhood, that I love this one, ADHD is overdiagnosed, especially nowadays. Studies say that roughly 5%, 5 to 10% of the population has ADHD. It used to be 2 to 4. Then it was like, 4 to 8. Now it's 5 to 10. And there's some people that think it's as high as 20 to 25%. So that poor parenting causes ADHD. And interesting, because it's not that poor parenting causes ADHD, because it doesn't. But ADHD is highly genetic, highly hereditary, which means that if you have it, there's a 40% chance that, or 80% chance that at least one of your parents has it, and a 40% chance that both of your parents have it. So if you grew up in a family of parents that were undiagnosed with ADHD, and they're scattered and are not organized and having emotional dysregulation and all of these things, then it looks like it looks like poor parenting. It's not great parenting, but it's also, the reason is that they are struggling. And so they think that the way you're behaving is, well, this is just normal. And it's not. But that's because in their family it's been normalized, because this is what it just looks like. They don't realize that this is actually outside of the norm. The girls have lower rates and less severe ADHD than boys, which again, we know is not true. That you don't need medication to treat it. There are people that choose not to be medicated, and that is totally fine and valid. But there are people that need it to get through. For myself, I know that when I'm not medicated, my symptoms get a lot harder, and it definitely makes my life a lot harder than when I do have it. That medication on the other end is that medication can cure ADHD, which no, it can't. You still have ADHD even with medication. It's like somebody who's diabetic. Insulin does not cure diabetes. It's symptom management, but it doesn't cure it. Same thing with medication for ADHD, right? That it's a behavioral issue, not a medical one. If you just focused enough, you just tried harder, right? That smart people can overcome ADHD on their own. Now, being smart does help with mitigating some of the symptoms of ADHD. That is true, but it doesn't mean that it's not a struggle. It doesn't mean that's not hard. It doesn't mean that it doesn't make your life harder. So just because you're intelligent, and that's part of the problem, is that if you're intelligent, a lot of times you're less likely to get assessed or diagnosed with ADHD, because you've learned how to cope and you get through. And so people are like, oh, you're fine. Like, you don't need anything. And so I was watching an interview by a guy who got diagnosed later in life, and he explained it perfectly. He said, on the outside, it looked like I was fine. I was married, had kids, owned my own home, was managing a team. But he's like, what people couldn't see was that it felt like I was trying to run through 3 feet of water. And when I got diagnosed and I got medication, he's like, now it feels like I'm running on the beach. I'm not on the boardwalk. It's still harder. Right? I'm still having to deal with the resistance from the sand, but at least I'm not trying to run through 3 feet of water. And I was like, I think that really resonated with me. Another one is that ADHD isn't a big deal, which it very much is. Or that people with ADHD can't focus on anything. And as we just learned, actually they can focus. Sometimes they can focus a little too well. So, and as I said before, my personal favorite, everybody has a little ADHD, which is not true. The dose is in the poison, right? If everybody struggles with these things from time to time, sure. But have you ever forgotten your wallet in the fridge? Because I have. And whenever I've said that to somebody who is neurotypical, they're like, no, why the hell would you do that? And when I've said it to somebody that has ADHD, they're like, oh yeah, I've done that. Or like, oh yeah, I totally get it. So yeah. So the next one is, do you want to get an ADHD diagnosis? Why or why not? Or if you've gotten a diagnosis, what has changed for you? Or do you know anybody that you think has ADHD and would benefit from a diagnosis? So what are your thoughts?
Do,
Go ahead.
do some people shy away from getting diagnosed because they
Mhm.
don't really want to know, or they think it's going to be too big of a thing to deal with if they are diagnosed with it?
Yeah, there are definitely people that are like, I'm pretty sure I have it, but I don't want to get diagnosed. One, because stigma. Two, because they feel like I don't need it. It's a big hassle to go through the whole process, or it's expensive. Or what if I do this, I do all of this work and I don't get the diagnosis, and then I'm gonna, be gaslighting myself. It could be that I'm worried about how this is going to be perceived, right? If I do get a diagnosis, is this going to kind of go on my record? Is this going to impact my insurance or my ability to, get a job or healthcare? So yeah, there are a lot of different reasons that people might potentially think that they have ADHD and not want to get a diagnosis, and it's all valid. Omer.
So I've always thought about it, but then because of like multiple reasons, like for example, when I go into the kitchen, every drawer is open when I leave. I forget to close any drawer. And just as you said, like you've left your wallet in the fridge, I've left things in random places. Like I've left like plates inside the bathroom because I might have went to throw something in the garbage and I was carrying my plate to go take it down to the kitchen. But then I placed it down because something came in my head and I forgot that I placed it down. And then my mom would call me and be like, "You left a dish in the bathroom. How is that possible?" I was like, "I don't know." So things like that always, right? But then the reason that stopped me from or like didn't like really like push me to go get it was because of usually when I would do these things, my mom would just tell me like, "Oh, you're careless," or like stuff like that. So then me thinking, okay, maybe I am careless and not maybe I have ADHD. So like like you kind of like accept what people tell you rather than going to see what like is really the issue at hand. So I feel like that's really what has kind of stopped me from getting it checked, but now I kind of have an interest of getting it checked, especially because one of my friends recently went and his school covered the cost of the diagnosis and everything, and so that really like pushed me to thinking of, hey, let me try because if my school can write me a grant for it, it's no harm.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, and you're right. And there can be a really big kind of like cultural or familial component to it. And again, there's a big societal thing of like, these are things that everybody struggles with. And so a lot of people still look at ADHD as very much a personal failing. It's like, oh, well, you're forgetful, or you're not trying hard enough, or if you really cared, you would do this. And it's not at all. But that's a lot of the work that I do with clients is really around kind of trying to integrate that sense of self, of who they are, and why they've struggled, and that it's not their fault, and that it's okay that they've struggled, and that there's nothing wrong with them, because even when you do get a diagnosis, it doesn't mean that all that internalized ableist bullshit that you've been told and fed your entire life goes away. It doesn't. It's still there. And so a big part of it is trying to kind of integrate that, your idea of who you are before you knew you had it or suspected that you had it, and after, and trying to understand that a lot of the things that you struggle with, there's reasons for it, and there's ways that you can cope, and that you are able to kind of like manage your the impact of ADHD on your life. And there's so many different ways to do it, and medication is just one, right? So the the next slide is pills don't teach skills. So medication can play an important role in managing our ADHD, but it's not the only tool. And it is a tool. It's not a cure-all. It's not something that's going to like magically fix it. Just because you take the medication doesn't mean that that ADHD symptoms will never show up again. That's not how it works, right? So part of this is like, is medication useful? Totally. And I would never say to somebody, don't take your medication. But I'd also never say to somebody, you have to take medication. That's a very personal choice that is up to that individual, and they can explore what that looks like, because the journey to get medicated is so intensely personal and can change depending on where you are, financial stability. Like, I'm self-employed, so I don't have benefits, so I'm having to pay for this out of pocket, which is expensive. Which, when I was self-employed, when I switched, I went self-employed, I couldn't take Vyvanse anymore because they only had the brand name. There was no generic, so I had to switch to another one so that I could get the generic version. Did I want to switch? No, because I like the Vyvanse. It was working for me, but I could not afford $400 a month out of pocket, right? And so these are the things that we kind of have to take into consideration. Okay. All right. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Here are some resources. There's CADRA, it's the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance. There's a lot of great resources out there, but one that I really like is How to ADHD on YouTube. It's a YouTube channel by Jessica McCabe. A lot of evidence backed research. She's great. It's very digestible, a lot of great information. The Attitude magazine, there's some controversy about it, so I will say kind of leave it up to your discretion. There is, oh, sorry about that. There is the adultadhdcenter.com. So it's they're based in Canada, I believe in BC, but they can do it across Canada, where they can do a virtual assessment. So, and the prices are actually pretty reasonable. I think it's around 300, which is way better than a lot of them, which are like 6, 7, up to 15, 4,000, right? Or the literal months waiting list to go through OHIP. So there are different kind of places out there if you're wanting to get assessed. And or like you said before, like, your friend, their school is able to pay for the assessment, which was fantastic, right? So kind of just trying to do some of that research. And then, shameless plug, there's my personal website, bodyresilience.ca, that has some information, and I'm adding to it all the time. So, questions? Go ahead, Omer.
So could you walk us through the process of when you got diagnosed, like the steps that you took? Was there like a lot of sessions and stuff? Was it more so just like a one-stop session? And like, how did you go about it afterwards? Like, were there like special accommodations that you were able to receive from like schools and work and stuff?
Well, I mean, I was already out of school at that point, and I was already self-employed at that point. No, sorry, I wasn't. Well, I was an independent contractor for a group practice. So, but yeah, so I asked my general practitioner, my doctor. She did a referral for a psychiatrist for me, so that was kind of covered under OHIP. They sent me a massive questionnaire to fill out. This thing was huge. So I did that, and then that was sent to them. And then I had, I think it was a 2 or 3 hour interview with the doctor and a student, where they just asked me a ton of questions, kind of like clarifying a lot of stuff that was kind of on the form that they sent. And then at the end of it, they sent me like a whole list of like, yes, you have it, and kind of here are the things why, here are some resources, stuff like that. So I had the official diagnosis. And then from there, I went to my GP, general practitioner, and said, okay, I now have the diagnosis, and I would like to get some ADHD medication. And so she prescribed that for me. So that kind of was my process.
Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, of course. Anything else?
I don't have any questions, but that quote, that pills don't teach skills.
Yeah.
Is a good one. And then what I thought of is that, but they do let you, for some people, They do let you be open and able to learn the skills then.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah, the pills don't make it so you don't have ADHD, but what they can do is enable you to be able to focus or concentrate long enough to be able to actually implement the skills that that we discussed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right.
All
So
right.
starting is the hardest part. You got this. So thank you so much for coming. I'm going to stop the sharing now. Or I'm going to stop.
Thank you.
All right, my bad. Stop the recording.